Now, let's talk a little bit about the social attitude survey that you might have heard about today. It's the latest annual survey of social attitudes in this country. It shows broadly that people are becoming less tolerant of poor people and think that people should take increasing responsibility for themselves rather than look to the state for support.
Well, more than 3,000 adults were surveyed by the Independent National Centre for Social Research, and it found that 63% believe parents who don't want to work are to blame for children living in poverty, and 26% think poverty is the result of laziness or lack of willpower.
In the mid-1990s, interestingly, that figure was only 15%, so quite a jump there. Also, 54% of those who were questioned in the survey believe that benefits are too high and discourage people from finding a job. And again, that figure is up from 3 decades or so ago. That figure stood at 35% when the survey was first carried out in the early 1980s.
Well, 75% think the gap between rich and poor is too large, but only 35% think the government should step in to redistribute wealth. Well, let's discuss this a little more with Owen Jones, who's the author of Chavs, The Demonisation of the Working Class. He's here with us in the studio. And Eamonn Butler is from the Adam Smith Institute. He's there in our central London studios. So good morning to you both. To you, first of all, Owen, surprised by these findings?
Depressing, but not surprising. I think there's a few factors at play. People probably roll their eyes at this, but the legacy of Thatcherism is very evident here. I mean, in the late 70s, Thatcher argued there wasn't such thing as poverty in Britain. People just didn't know how to budget properly. And throughout the 80s, there was this idea of, well, get on your bike, as Tebbit famously told Britain's 4 million unemployed at the time. As well as that, Labour stopped making the case about inequality when those arguments disappeared from public view. That had an impact on attitudes. But as well as all of that, I think any positive portrayal of poor people has been all but airbrushed out of the media. When poor people appear at all, there is scroungers. I mean, if we think about benefits today, I think if people had been asked, can you live on £67.50 a week? Most people would have said no. That's the level of job seekers allowance, but most people don't know that. They think it's much, much higher, and that if you're unemployed, even after hundreds of thousands of people were thrown out of work by this economic crisis, they're scrounging off the state.
Eamonn Butler from the Adam Smith Institute. This is really not surprising, a legacy of the 80s in particular.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's hard times now. I mean, people are short of money themselves, and they don't really want to see their taxes rising anymore. And they also, I think, become less tolerant of people who are perhaps on benefits but not actually actively seeking work. When times are good and everybody's well off, you can afford to overlook that. But I think now people are much more critical of folk who are on benefit but not actually doing something positive to try to get themselves into work.
But part of the problem is, how do the people who've come up with these answers in the survey know that the people who are on benefits aren't actively looking for work? There'll be plenty of people who actually would desperately love a job and are struggling in their geographical area to find one.
Absolutely right. And I mean, I think one of the reasons why people say that government action here is not the answer, I think they're quite right, because we're actually trapping people on benefits. You have social benefits, but then if you try to get a job, you're faced by the minimum wage, you're faced by taxation, and almost as soon as you start working, you come into tax and national insurance. Your employer again has a lot of regulation on him or her, so it makes them very reluctant to take on people, particularly young people with no skills. So people get trapped into unemployment right from the beginning.
Well, people are trapped in unemployment because there aren't enough jobs to go around. There's over 2.6 million people unemployed. There's another million on incapacity benefit the government wants to push into work, and there's less than 500,000 vacancies. And just to show how extreme this attack on so-called scroungers has become, your main news was about cancer. The government is now proposing to force those undergoing chemotherapy into work-based assessment to see if they can go back into work. In my view, that is the pit, but that is the logical conclusion of where this stigmatisation of those in benefits has landed.
Doesn't Eamonn have a point, though, in the sense that if there is a hardening of attitudes, we are in austerity times, and perhaps that's inevitable?
Well, I think it is sadly inevitable, given I think the government has intentionally stigmatised those who've been thrown out of work through no fault of their own. For example, I'll give you an example. Before the election, Jeremy Hunt argued that people on benefits were using them to subsidise large families. Only 3.6% of people on long-term benefits are in a family of 4 or above. But you don't get that shown in the media or argued by politicians. And unless people are shown who are living in poverty, not least those in work. I mean, the majority of people in poverty, we should always make this point, are actually in work. That reality is never shown. No wonder then people's attitudes are hardening.
Eamonn Butler, doesn't this research show that this is an increasing individualism, which is not the same thing as the big society? David Cameron wants us all to be part of the big society, all pulling together. These stats show that in particularly some specific areas, it's purely about me. No one wants to spend extra money to help the environment, even though they recognise there's an issue there. No one wants extra housing to be built, even though they realise that extra housing is needed because of a growing population. That's not big society, is it?
No, I don't really see it in those terms at all. I don't think that that's what's going on here. I think it is that times are hard, and we've seen government spending on all sorts of things, health and education in particular. Spending on health has doubled in the last 15 years, but is it any better than it was? And people are looking critically at it and saying, no, it isn't actually, but we still have
Can I just say
the world's worst cancer rates.
That's not true. I mean, there was record levels of satisfaction with the NHS before the last election, so that's simply not true. I mean, but the point is, and in the media in particular, you don't, for example, get the, in terms of the positive investment you've got in the NHS and education, instead you've got emphasis on scare stories, on things which went wrong. I think it has a lot to do with the media and politicians not showing the positive reality, not least of people who are struggling to find work, don't have jobs because of their own, because of a crisis they had nothing to do with. And then if we look at public services, the constant attack on public services, frankly, often by privately educated journalists who use private healthcare.
Well, I think it's got a lot to do with the reality that people see in their everyday lives. And you talked about the joblessness and so on, but a lot of people note the fact that, and employers will tell you, they would much prefer to hire people from Eastern Europe, from Poland and so on, because they've got a better culture and attitude to work and all the rest of it. And I think people are aware of that, and that is one of the things which is coming up in this survey. It's not an individualism or anything. It's simply that people have come to the conclusion that foreigners can get jobs perfectly easily because they're prepared to work. Why can't our people do that?
And Butler, we have to leave it there. I suspect if we went on for hours, we still wouldn't agree with the two of you, but thank you both for your time here this morning. Thanks to you both.
Owen Jones and Eamonn Butler, thanks very much. Now, I think we will turn our attention to the latest business news with